I analyzed over 100 different properties to get to this one. Getting into real estate, you have tax advantages and your returns, they're moving in the other direction. The more equity you have in the home, then the more return you're going to get, as well as rental rates go up over time.
You can influence the outcomes a lot more in real estate than you can in any type of stock or equity position.
With real estate, I can look at getting cash flow now. The more cash flow I have month to month, the more options I have in my personal life.
Today's episode is very special as we pull back the curtain on the journey of one of our students at the Remote Real Estate Academy to get his first investment property under contract. His name is Adam Ullrich, and you'll hear directly from him on the exact process he followed to go from just thinking about it to under contract. Without further ado, let's get into it. Today, I'm joined by my friend, fellow investor, and a student of mine, Adam Ullrich. Adam and I have known each other for a couple of years now. We were part of a writing challenge a couple of years ago, and we became friends. And over time, I learned that he was interested in real estate investing. And it just so happened to coincide very nicely with me launching the Remote Real Estate Academy. And so he was a member of our founding cohort. Part of the purpose of this show, recording it right now, it is December 29th as of the time of this recording. Adam just went under contract on his very first out-of-state rental. So I wanted to celebrate that milestone and also just give an opportunity for Adam to share his story, how he got here. So Adam, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Aaron. Excited to be here. I've been a long-time listener. I guess I'm a hybrid real estate professional. I pretty well incorporate the hybrid part of my lifestyle. My interest in real estate started about 7 years ago. My now wife, then girlfriend, and I were looking for a place to live, and it was rent or buy. We opted to buy, ended up in a single-family home, but at the time I was looking at multifamily. At that time, the single family was all we could take on, but I never stopped saving. I went back to school while I was working on the factory floor. I ended up getting a bachelor's degree in business administration, ended up in a corporate position, continued to save and learn. When Aaron developed the Remote Real Estate Academy, I realized that is exactly the thing that I needed to start learning. As I saw you developing it through your newsletter, at the time I ended up, there was a similar time period, I ended up in my current position, which is head of operations for a global company. It's got about 300 employees. And from there, I finally got some significant leverage, savings rates going up, and the Remote Real Estate Academy opened up the first cohort. Happy to join, is excited to be on the ground floor of that. Really was able to validate what I had already learned and then fill the gaps of what I didn't from yourself and Nathan, who've actually been through it and are continuing to grow your portfolios. So fast forward about, I guess it's been a little over a year, and multiple webinars and connections through the Remote Real Estate Academy. One being with the Bright Investors, Callahan, and the other one being with Brandon Goldsmith from a real estate group, Reefco, in Ohio. Those two connections really sealed the deal. Then from there, ended up with this property today that I'm closing on in January.
Amazing. So tell us about the property that you're under contract on.
Sure. Yeah, it's a duplex in between Dayton and Cincinnati. It's a pretty solid market, a lot of manufacturing jobs. One of the things that I really picked up on when looking at the different properties is there population growth in the area? Obviously, the crime rate, is the crime solid, right? And is there a good property management company? Because I want to look at this as a business from more of a financial perspective. So if I'm going to be the CFO of my real estate company. So property management will take care of the vast majority of it, and I'll be watching the numbers.
Awesome. And remind us, because I can't remember if you mentioned it or not, where are you located and how far away are you from this property?
Right. I'm located in southeastern Indiana. This property is, I think, around 60 miles or so away from me. Not too far, but far enough that I wouldn't want to be running there to fix a water heater or something like that. It's close enough that I think it gives a little bit more confidence, because if something does come up, I can actually go out there and do something about it. But it's still far enough away that I can really lean into the remote part of the investing. And ideally, I never even visit that property.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think remote is also a mindset as much as it is an actual proximity thing. Our first rental was a mile down the road. So even though I teach and largely work with people who want to invest sometimes even thousands of miles away, I think sometimes there's a comfort level of knowing that you can get there, especially as you're trying to build out the base of your portfolio and get comfortable with the idea of building and scaling. So I think when we first spoke, you were much more of the mind that you would like to find something where you can personally self-manage it, like almost entirely. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yeah. At that time, the way I was doing analysis, I couldn't figure out how to make the numbers work unless I was self-managing. In my immediate market, the property management rates are like 15%. So as I learned more from the academy, I changed how I was looking at different properties and different markets. And then I found out, oh, wow, there's other areas where you can still find a deal. Saying that, I probably analyzed over 100 different properties to get to this one. And 3 or 4 of those, I made an offer.
See, that right there is such a crucial element of what makes people successful, especially in the early running. We usually say it's 90 deals in 90 days. It just gives you a finger on the pulse. Even if the first 15 that you don't pencil at all and they're totally not going to work for you, at least you went through and you started, saying, okay, well, maybe my parameters aren't right, or maybe the market I'm looking at isn't right. Something that I'm looking for, I'm not finding. So what do I need to change? Do I need to change the price point I'm looking at? Do I need to change some of the expenses? Do I need to find a new market entirely? It's only through the process of looking at and understanding that data that you can really understand if you're going to be in the right position. And the second big mindset thing that I've noticed, I think with you and with several other people I've talked to recently, is people underwrite, they do their deal analysis based on the list price of the property. And that's where a lot of people are having trouble right now, is because they take the list price at face value, which it is face value. But the question that we try and equip people to ask is, what can I pay for this property based on what I need my returns to be, based on the available team I have and what that costs me? Like, what is the offer price that I can write instead of just what is the list price on the property? And I recall working with you on a couple of specific ones where I think you started to make that shift in your head, where you started thinking about what is my offer price versus what is the list price. Is that remotely accurate?
Or that is accurate. Yeah, I went through all those stages but I think to your point, it's getting started by doing the deal analysis, just basically meeting yourself where you are and then running the numbers and then asking. So that's where the coaching comes in so important. Then asking, saying, how far off it? And then you start to fill the gaps. Then your next analysis is better. And the next one is better, right? Until the point where you feel like you're proficient at that point. I think there's a list price. I was about 10 or 15% under the list price, and they didn't ultimately accept it. But for that market, that was the appropriate offer. And later on, I kept an eye on the property, and I'd say it was generally justified because it stayed on the market a significant time.
Yeah, you come up with your own rationale for the offer price. Sometimes people lowball just for the sake of lowballing. But typically, I think if you use real rationale that says, okay, these are the returns I'm aiming for. I have a team in this market that I know and trust can operate this and play out the business plan that I built. This is what I can afford to offer for your property. You're not just like, hey, you listed at 200K, I'm going to offer you 120 because I feel like it.
Right.
You can actually rationalize it, explain it to your agent. They can explain it to the seller's agent if there is one. And then you only offer. If you only ever offer based on prices that will work for you, then it's very difficult to fail. If you offer the list price and that ends up locking you into a negative cash flow, then you can be in a bad position. So I think that's one of the biggest mindset shifts that I think you embodied very well. And now you're in a position where you went through those almost 100 deals that you analyzed, you made 3 or 4 offers. And I actually think some of those offers not getting accepted is a good thing, right? Because that trains the muscle of being comfortable with putting things out there, even if they might get rejected. Mm-hmm. They were well rationalized, well thought through offers. And it's okay if people say no. Sometimes you might have to submit 10 offers. I think of it like analyze 100, submit 10 to get 1, right? It's not always going to be that perfect. It depends on your market and your parameters. Mm-hmm. But I think it's okay, especially at the beginning, especially in a market as sensitive as this one, where the interest rates are still high and the affordability is still very difficult. Mm-hmm. Now, when I see you talk about the property that you're hopefully going to close on here in a week or two, you are comfortable with what you're doing. Mm-hmm. And that is so important, because I think the last thing you want is to rush into something that you don't feel good about just because you want to get a deal done. I think, your slow, methodical approach that's backed by data embodies what we try and teach in the program. So you mentioned the analysis tools and the team. I want to talk about both of those. So we'll give a quick free plug here to Bright Investor, which is a market and deal analysis tool. Donato Callahan is a partner of Remote Real Estate Academy, and he did a workshop with us recently where he showed off the tool and his keys for analyzing a market. And so I would love for you to maybe just talk about, like, how did that workshop and then the tool enhance what you were learning in the academy?
Absolutely. Yes. Previously doing an analysis in a spreadsheet or even using a different software tool, but there were some things that were missing from the analysis that really left me with questions I didn't even know how to ask at the time. So then as we were in that workshop, the Nada ran us through exactly how to use the tool. And I was more and more impressed because of the amount of data that tool provided. And I realized, oh, wait, these are the things that I was unsure about. One being like population in an area. I could find the population and I could find different numbers for the population growth, but I really trusted the sources that were pointed to from the Bright Investor tool. Other things being crime data is hard to find, or at least I thought it was hard to find in doing deal analysis. And that can absolutely be a deal breaker. So it clearly shows up. Those are just a few of them. But a key point to mention was after I did the workshop, I ended up joining Bright Investor and doing some analysis. And I realized nowhere near as smooth of using it as I'd seen Donato. And then I jumped on a call with him, and again, it clicked by the end of the call, and it just absolutely changed how I was underwriting the deals.
Yeah, definitely. It helps to have the founder of the platform run you through it. And that actually points to one other thing I want to just ask you about in general, which is like the role of coaches and mentors in this process.
Getting started, seeing other people succeed and do it well and ask questions, just being in that group, in that environment, it gives you the right energy to do it on your own. So the other point would be, for me, it was in the deal analysis. So here's a property. It looks good. Am I getting over eager, or am I looking at it in the correct way? I definitely had some early ones that were just being over eager. I can see that in hindsight. At the time, I couldn't clearly identify. And you were able to walk through those and break it down into an analytical mindset. And at that point, okay, yeah, this isn't going to work. And as time went on of those deal analysis, then started to get closer and closer to the mark. Fewer things I was missing.
Absolutely. And the idea of building a buy box and doing deal analysis is largely personalized to each person's goals and risk appetite. And so the way I analyze deals and the way Nathan analyzes deals might be different than the way you want to analyze deals. But I think especially when some of the best conversational flow I've seen within our community is when somebody posts a deal like you did and you say, hey, here are the numbers I ran based on how I learned to do it.
Mm-hmm.
What is your guys' perspective? So you already brought a point of view. It's not like you said, hey, you guys go do all this for me.
Mm-hmm.
You said, hey, this is how I've applied the stuff that I've already learned.
Mm-hmm.
Here's what I came up with. What do you guys think? And then we were each able to come in and say, hey, well, I think maybe CapEx is a little bit low for this, age of a property, or here's a couple additional considerations that we might think of from things that have happened to us. And it became a dialogue where we could make you feel more comfortable that you're seeing it from different perspectives. And then also in areas where we have potentially made mistakes in the past, we can hopefully spare you from having to do that yourself. So I think that was a good example of the community and that the whole coaching container functioning exactly as we hoped it would, which is helping you get through these kind of little friction points throughout the process. And then at the end of the day, like you're sinking a lot of your own money as an investment into this.
Mm-hmm.
The feeling of actually being comfortable is pretty hard to get to, especially on that first deal when you just like you've saved, this is your hard-earned money. You like you said, you've been interested for 7 years and you're finally ready to close on a true kind of investment property. And just like the confidence gap, getting past that was the idea at least. And it seems like that's how it played out.
I think it absolutely did. Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if it would take me longer to get into an investment property, or I'd have the house hack. Had I not been through the academy and then the connections made within it.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so let's rewind before this property. So the house that you're living in now, you also have plans to use at some point as an investment property, correct?
Correct. Yeah. It's not set in stone, but we are in really good terms with it. So I know it would have some solid cash flow. It's an 1880 home, so it's quite old. And I've been working on it for the past 6 years or so and renovating different parts of it, building a garage on it to make more useful space. But longer term, we won't be staying here, maybe 2 or 3 years. And at that point, look for a different property. And from here on, unless we stumble on that house where you're just going to buy and stay in, that's your lifetime house, then we're going to be looking at even future primary homes with a deal analysis perspective to say, okay, if we don't stay there, we don't want to just turn around and sell it. We want to keep so it does a cash flow for that market. But yeah, to that point, now we'll look 2 or 3 years and we'll probably look at renting this out. And if we're still in the area, then it may be the first self-managed property. because of those high property management rates.
Yeah. Yeah. I made no secret of the fact that 3 out of our 8 rentals, we did the live then rent strategy. And it's one of the most amazing ways to scale because you can get in with more favorable financing. You can live there, get some utility out of it as a individual utility for you and your wife and potentially any family members that you may choose to add in the future. And then also when you move out, you can keep it as a rental, knowing the house inside and out. And I think you're a bit more handy than I am, but there is a lot of value in having lived in a house so that you understand the quirks and the little things already, especially if you choose to self-manage, which we did for the first basically 5 years. We were investing, we were self-managing. Only this year did we transition away from that. But I think to the point, and we've had this discussion a few times, learning to self-manage and learning all the motions that go into it is incredibly valuable, especially if you plan to hold for decades, because the chances that you're going to have, even if you have a rock star property manager, the chances you're going to stay in lockstep for 20 or 30 years are pretty low, right? So the more you can learn about that process and how to navigate it, even if you don't intend to self-manage, it's still a valuable skill to have in your toolkit. So I love that you guys are thinking about, like you said, even whether it's this house or any future purchases, as maybe having multi-purpose instead of just saying, oh, like we're going to buy a primary house and sink a lot of our net worth into that. So I want to actually use that as a lens for how you think about retirement savings and personal finance in general. Because one thing I know and have always admired about you is that you also have invested a lot in the skills to grow in your career, right? So you've taken a lot of ongoing education. And the way I perceive that, in addition to you just enjoying learning, is that you're also trying to make yourself more valuable so that you can continue to grow your earnings in your career, right? I see you do things like invest in real estate, which is an incredible first step of starting the snowball rolling down the hill. But do you have like a kind of broader financial landscape or allocation strategy that you're working towards?
Yeah, the way that I approach personal finance is broad strokes. I don't like to get into the nitty gritty details with it because I think if you have the same basic behaviors and you execute those consistently, you'll get where you want to go. One of those things is take advantage of any matches for a 401k or any kind of investment, right? Full advantage of those. The other thing to keep in mind is whatever you put into those, it's locked up. So do you want to add more than your match? It's not usually beneficial, right? Because that extra bit could be saved for real estate. Not to mention now you're diversifying in asset classes. So to me, that's a huge point. I'm not going to get any returns that are beneficial to me from my 401k or stocks until age 59 and a half. With real estate, I can look at getting cash flow now. And the more cash flow I have month to month, the more options I have in our personal life. That's exciting. That's interesting to work to. But to your other point, from an education standpoint, I started off on the factory floor and really worked up through the ranks and education wise. And I'm now getting an executive master's business administration. So finishing that in August. There's some synergies that you find along the way. One of those is, even though I work in business, it's interesting to find that as I'm doing this real estate and setting up an LLC, I'm closing gaps I had between business and manufacturing and all the elements thereof, and then business from the perspective of entrepreneurship. And it's pretty engaging. But longer term, yeah, I plan to continue to increase my skills by executing well at work and making progress. So part of that is the MBA. And after that point, I don't know that I'll benefit from any more schooling, but I certainly will for like professional development, which I consider professional and personal development, like the Remote Real Estate Academy.
Yeah, no, I love that attitude. And like you said, maybe there's like the formal education with credentials is one thing, and executive MBA is incredibly valuable in many ways. But like you said, the learning never stops. The ongoing development, whether it's networking, learning new skills, even the writing cohort we were in. Yeah. I also want to talk about the impact that's had. It's had an enormous impact on me. I could largely trace the Remote Real Estate Academy back to starting writing and pulling some of these ideas out of my head and learning the niche that was most powerful to me. But even stuff like that, which is a totally extracurricular, not really related to either of our professions, but it's something we chose to do that I know had a big impact. I think continuing to make those investments, especially still towards the early or mid part of our careers, it can only serve well. And I view that the kind of earlier you make those investments, the longer you have to get value out of them as well. So I guess before we go into the writing stuff, the last question I have is what do you feel like real estate's purpose in your financial life? Is it to accelerate retirement? Is it to build up enough cash flow to have you or your wife stop working sooner? Like what is the outcome that you hope real estate has on you and your family?
So it's a bit of both, right? I think that one of those outcomes gets the other, right? So if you increase your cash flow, ultimately that's the main goal, is just increasing cash flow. So when I'm doing the deal analysis, how much pure cash flow after all expenses are accounted for do I have each month? That's the most important question that I answer when I'm looking at. And then I like to see in a return, is it 6%? Is it 15%? To see what that looks like. Because it helps if you're already used to looking at any kind of stocks, or if you glance at your 401k, it helps to put it in this term rather than just dollar amounts. So the cash flow then allows it to say, do we want to retire? We can, right? Or to your point, if we look at we want to have children in a few years, then at that point, one of us can stay home because we have the cash flow to offset that. Alternatively, maybe we go a different route and we want to do more traveling for a year or two. Cash flow could support us while we're doing that. A lot of different options, but it ultimately comes down to creating wealth, but creating options for ourselves to live and be able to do things that, we don't believe we otherwise would be able to on that same timeline.
I can appreciate that for sure. I've always liked the phrase work optional, even if the option you choose is to continue working, right? The more flexibility you can then afford yourself through the investments that you've built up. Real estate's one of the few that has the potential to kick off monthly cash flow. And it's one of the few that you have the real ability. I don't want to say control, because I think control is a little too strong of a word, but you can influence the outcomes a lot more in real estate than you can in any type of stock or equity position, where you're not on the board, you're not the executive team. Even if you work at the company, you have very little influence over the overall performance of your investment. Right. Whereas when you own a piece of real estate, not only do you have influence over the outcome, but you typically have bought with some sort of leverage. And leverage can be perceived as too risky in certain contexts. But I truly believe from the bottom of my heart that responsible leverage, such as a 30-year fixed rate loan with a reasonable down payment backed by solid fundamentals and cash flow, is very different than taking out a bunch of leverage to go all in on a growth stock, just hoping you're going to ride a wave, right? So I just think those benefits and the amplification of your returns backed by those fundamentals can provide all the options you could ever need, especially if you do it with that kind of data-driven, methodical approach that's mapped to your personal goals and your personal strategy the way that you've started to do it. So I love that. Most people think I'm full of crap when I say that I can operate and grow my portfolio in an average of 20 minutes per day. So instead of asking you to take my word for it, I sat down with my business partner, Nathan, and we ran through our entire 20-minute investor strategy in a free workshop. We go through all the different workflows, software, and tools we use to stay in control of our portfolios so we can focus on what matters most to us. You can watch the entire workshop and download our workflows for free at 20minuteinvestor.com. Again, that's 20minuteinvestor.com. And back to the show. Okay, so writing, I got to ask you about this because I know this is something you and I are both passionate about, and specifically journaling. So the act of reflecting and giving yourself prompts to make sure that you're really processing the moments in your life as you go along, both from an investor's perspective. So as you went through this process of learning real estate investing, and from just an overall how you organize your life perspective, what are some of the biggest impacts that writing and journaling has had on you?
Thinking, right? So writing is foundational for thinking. So as you're writing, you're forcing yourself to think in different ways. And as a result, you end up making progress in different areas of life that you may not have without the reflection. So there's the writing part as you're writing for an audience, and the journaling, you're really writing for yourself. So that's probably, I think, the biggest distinction between the two. Yeah, to your point, I don't know that I claim it as my niche, but it's something that I fell into and I was really interested. So I went with it, was the journaling niche, right? And I actually wrote a journaling guidebook on from scarcity to abundance. So it's actually, how do you go from a mindset of scarcity to an abundance mindset? That's been the same kind of curve I've followed in my life. And I think I'm still on it, but definitely journaling is what's been a foundational skill for that. Now the writing aspect has been useful across the board. Whether it's analyzing somebody else's writing, you can actually identify after you do some yourself, oh, this is really good. Is it engaging? What makes them special? How do they grow an audience? To business writing, where you can consider things from a different angle. Not to mention just being in that space really does expose you to a lot of new ideas and technology.
100%. Yeah, I totally fell down the rabbit hole. I always thought of myself as a writer, and then I realized I was never actually writing. And then when I joined the Ship 30 for 30 challenge that we were both in, and then fell into the funnel of all the other ongoing products that the two founders started, I just found myself feeling like I was thinking more clearly. To your point, it's all about thinking and the ability to process those thoughts internally through journaling, and then externally through putting it out on social media and getting feedback.
Yeah.
Breaking past my fear of putting my thoughts out there is one of the most consequential milestones in my personal life. And I think one of the throughputs with real estate is that a lot of people are interested in or invest in real estate, and they haven't told a soul about it.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, they might be afraid of consequence from their employer, or they might be afraid of some sort of judgment from their family or friends that, oh, that's riskier. I don't understand that. Therefore, you individually might not want to share about it. But I think one of the best discoveries I ever made was when I started sharing that this was something my wife and I were doing, investing in real estate, building this foundational blocks for our future, learning these skills, taking the entrepreneurial mindset and applying it. What I found was that not only did I find out there were a lot of people that I knew that were investing in real estate that I didn't know, but also people were drawn in by that idea. They were supportive, and anybody, the tiny fraction of people that weren't, I didn't care. Though they weren't people that I wanted in my corner anyway, if that's how they were going to be about it. But I thought that putting those thoughts out there and declaring it as part of your identity, that's why I like this hybrid real estate professional umbrella, because you're not saying that, oh, I'm disregarding my career or that I don't have anything else going on in my life. You're saying, no, real estate investing is part of my life. It is part of a broader portfolio of assets, such as my career, my family, my health, that will contribute to the ongoing greater good of my family and ideally my community. And that was a big mindset shift too for me. And I wonder if now that you're especially are under contract and you're really starting to embed this in your identity, do you feel a similar shift, or do you feel a little more comfortable kind of putting your real estate identity out there?
I do. And yeah, it's well said, because when I started writing with Ship 30 for 30, I'd never written or published like anything online at all. I never got into social media very much. The reason that it drew me to it was, well, depending on the environment you're in, it significantly impacts your outcomes. And the only way to change that trend is to introduce new elements to your environment. In my case, it felt like it was kind of an echo chamber, and everyone around me is doing the same thing. And those things were not the future that I envisioned. I didn't know how to bridge the gap. That writing cohort just seemed like an opportunity to learn something new, and more importantly, meet new and interesting people, which is where we met. Yeah, I think breaking through and being able to talk about whatever I find interesting online, and then developing and honing in on, in this case, journaling. And it'll be something else before long. Real estate's going to be something I'll introduce and talk about a bit more in time as well. It just creates that network effect of opportunities. And to your point, you're not thinking, when you do it, you shouldn't be thinking about the people that are going to have a negative response, including employers, because it tells you more than it tells you what you need to know. If people are having a negative response, those people probably aren't good for you to have in your life anyways. And while it's more tricky from an employer standpoint, they don't have to support by any means, but if it's something that's negative, when it's something you're doing personally that doesn't impact your work, that tells you something about the company right there. So I don't know that there is any significant downsides to doing it. I've only found generally benefits from it.
Yeah, I think some of the perceived downside, I've grappled with this a lot myself, because I do care about my career and I care about my job, and I want to continue to advance, as I'm grateful to have been able to do recently. I don't want to be punished for having this other business and thing that's very important to me and my family on the side. The perceived downside is that you will be thought of as someone who has split focus, and therefore you can't succeed in your job. I think that's more of a limiting belief than it is anything, because it's on you to prove to your employer that you're still focused and dedicated on your job, right? That responsibility, whether you're doing something else or not, the results that you have at your job are what will ultimately dictate the outcomes. Or, as you said, if the employer is going to punish you for something that's unrelated and not affecting your work, then that kind of tells you something about them and whether you want to be there or not long-term anyway. And I think it's okay if part of why I enjoy what I do and why I see a lot of commonalities in what you do is that we're learning all these business operations and even like in your case, supply chain, a lot of these very versatile skills that even though the context is totally different, you can apply them to become a better real estate investor. And as you said, I think I heard you say this earlier. I want to make sure I heard you correctly, but you think of yourself as like the CFO of your real estate business that you're building now.
Mm-hmm.
And that mindset of like, I've always thought of it as my real estate portfolio is a part of a diversified stream of incomes that I have built for myself. One of which is my salary, one of which is real estate, and third of which now is the academy and the coaching program that I offer. I don't view any one of those as overly weighted or way more important than the others. I'm treating them with equal seriousness because I believe that there's tons of upside potential across all three of them. Yeah. But you can't ignore one and expect it to still be there the next day or the next month. So I don't know how you feel about that. Like I think you called it CFO. Yeah. I usually think of it as CEO mindset around your whole like basket of income streams.
That's fair. Yeah. I think I'd hone it on the CFO because at least considering I'm looking at one property right now, I want to manage it from a financial standpoint. But yeah, longer term as it grows, more people are involved in that process, then yeah, it would evolve into more of a broader management focus. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think this is actually the last thread I want to pull on here. So when you're doing this initial, like call it first 2 or 3 properties in your portfolio, I think one of the other things I've seen a lot of people grapple with is it feels like it's too small or the returns or the cash flow. People get discouraged. They say, I'm only cash flowing net $150 or $200 a month. How can that possibly change my future? It's too small. That barely covers my cell phone bill. And so the ability to zoom out and see the big picture and maybe look ahead 2 to 3 years. I think I heard you say like maybe there will be another property or two over the next couple of years. Mm-hmm. Like that skill of looking ahead and visualizing how this stuff plays out over the long term can be easy to lose sight of when you're right at the beginning. What have you done to be able to continue to keep the big picture in mind and celebrate this milestone without getting discouraged that, maybe it's not as big as you want it to be in the long run?
Well, I think that's the beauty of the hybrid part of being the real estate professional, right? Is that because I'm focusing on career as well, my earnings go up with career over time. So I can stay focused on that and then increasing savings relative to the amount that the career goes up. And then that improves and tightens the time it takes me to buy a new property. So that even if I'm only earning 200 off of the first one, then the next one will be another 200. It'll take me less time to get it. It's not going to take me 7 years to get this next property. My goal is to do it within a year. That might be a bit much, but it's good to have that aggressive goal. The other thing is putting it in the context of that $200, $250, whatever you're earning off your property. For example, the money I had saved for that down payment, which 25% on an investment property that you're not living in, that money was earning in a money market fund in one of my accounts. So I got to see what 4%, 5.5% interest was earning me month to month. And while that looks great, in the last 6 months or more, it's gone down from that 5.5% to about 4%. So you can see it change. Not only that, you end up paying taxes on that money. So getting into real estate, you have tax advantages and your returns they're moving in the other direction more often, right? The more equity you have in the home, then the more return you're going to get, as well as rental rates go up over time in line with inflation. So putting those factors together gives you the bigger picture that makes that what seems like a little amount month to month compound and snowball into a lot. And just have to get started and then look at it with that longer term vision. What will it look like in 5 years? What will it look like in 10 years? So
yeah. Really, I think a snowball is the best analogy because the loan pay down is the lowest at the beginning. The cash flow is usually the lowest at the beginning. The appreciation hasn't kicked in yet at the beginning. And the tax benefits, you don't benefit from those until the first year when you go to actually file. And so I think it can be easy to get discouraged. You did all this work to get a property under contract and close, and you get the first check, and there's an amazing feeling when you get the first check. But then you realize that it is a slow drip. It's not a fast stream of cash. I used to work in the concerts industry, and I worked at a rock club that was part of a company that ran arena and stadium shows. And they would always talk about the clubs as a river of nickels, right? The margins were small and the shows were small, but you do enough of them and you continue to grow and build that business, then over time, it still contributes an amazing amount to the overall bottom line of the company. I view these early stage rentals as the same thing, right? You're making an investment. It's its own little startup business within your broader portfolio. And like you said, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, when that loan pay down really accelerates, when the rent growth has continued steadily, and you're still, in theory, most likely using fixed rate debt that hasn't changed, that's when it really starts to magnify. And so it's not just that you're getting that $200 a month and that's all you'll ever have. Like you said, it really is an effective hedge against inflation, that your cash flow streams will continue to grow over time. You can snowball that money into additional properties. You can snowball it into paying down your loans. There's a number of different ways you can go. But one thing I know for absolute certain is that if you never start, none of that will ever kick in. I think you've done a great job keeping the big picture in mind. And that's just one thing I want to impart to anyone listening who's thinking about getting started or they're close to getting their first one under contract. Don't lose sight of the big picture, because that's what this is really all about. It doesn't stop with the first closing. It starts with the first closing.
Right. And to your point, when we talk about it in this context, it sounds like everything went just perfectly according to plan. And that's just not the reality, right? There's been ups and downs and then plenty of different self-doubt along the way. But the main thing is every time I was confronted with my own self-doubt process, reorienting, looking at why I was interested in the first place, looking at other people's success with it, and then saying, okay, then nothing has changed, just my perception in the moment. Right. And then continuing forward.
That pretty much encapsulates the whole investor journey at the beginning right there. It's like you do have to do some retooling in your mindset. But your theme of your journaling product, from scarcity to abundance, that's a shift everyone has to make. Even if you came from a household full of abundance, it's still, when you're growing into your own adult life, even if your parents thought like that, you still have to discover that mindset yourself at some point along the way. And I think real estate, it can feel scarce for some reason or another, especially you start looking around and you're like, nothing works out. None of these deals work. There aren't enough houses. It's like, well, there are, first of all. And especially if you widen your net and you learn, that's why I really like remote real estate investing. When you open up the entire map as a potential palette, almost certainly you can find something that will fit your goals and the timeline of those goals. And so I think, just all the different mindset shifts along the way, actually being willing to do a little bit of work, not a ton. I don't think you ever sat down and spent 5 hours a day on this. Like,
Never.
You were doing consistent little chunks of time. What we teach in the academy is 20 minutes a day. It seems like what you were doing is over the course of the last 12 months, since we started working together, you were putting in those little incremental bits of work, retooling your mindset, learning the deal analysis, putting offers on the ones that made sense, and finally getting under contract with one that really fits as a result. And if, assuming I didn't inaccurately describe anything there, that's pretty much exactly how it's supposed to work.
Yeah, no, you accurately described it. For me, with different work obligations, I would end up doing, instead of 20 minutes a day, what oftentimes I would do is several days a week, I might do an hour or an hour and a half and dive deeper. And that got the amount of time it took me to do the deal analysis got shorter, right? Markets were chosen. I think one thing I definitely wanted to mention and bring up is the importance of finding an investor-friendly real estate agent. That was a game changer. I had worked with different real estate agents that were absolutely fantastic, but I didn't know what that really meant until I met one through the academy, right? Brandon Goldsmith. And that was night and day different. And it's like, whoa, this just got a lot easier. So some of those barriers to entry, the friction points were reduced significantly enough that confidence went up along with the underwriting improvement. And that's where we're at today.
100%. And so finding an investor-friendly agent can help a lot. The inverse of that is finding an agent that has no idea what an investor is looking for or how to speak in terms of returns and understanding the rental dynamics can hurt a lot. And I unfortunately know that from experience, but I think that's one of the other benefits of being in a community or just learning and being around other investors is that you end up meeting people who usually, if another investor is willing to work with someone long-term, they probably at least know how to work with investors. So that's a great call out. And we could do a whole nother session on the team building element, because I think that's ultimately, for longevity purposes, that's what makes this strategy, instead of having to reinvent the wheel every time. Now, if you want to go invest again in the same market, you can do that because you've already done a lot of the upfront work to understand what you're looking for and then find the teammates that can help you make it happen. Yeah, that is a great call out. Are there any other nuggets you want to drop, or otherwise, I think we hit a lot of good stuff here.
Yeah, maybe the last one is another barrier to entry. If you're learning from books and podcasts, you might think that getting started requires you to network like crazy. That might be something that's taken away. And the other side is there's commonly said that you can invest with other people's money, which I don't recommend looking at that as a place to start, because that's like jumping in feet first and without having a background on exactly what that means. So slow and steady, I think, is the best way to look at it and get started. You can adjust and improve as you go along. You have to build your foundational knowledge first. And then back to the networking, I'm not somebody that would typically aggressively network, right? I like things to happen organic. That means a lot more. I feel like the relationships are more solid when that happens. And joining the group is exactly what that led to. And nothing happens overnight, but finding the right group of people and finding that your values align, that goes a long way. And so again, back to just retool your mindset, again, find the group that matches for you and then stick with it for the long haul. Continue to just focus on the fundamentals and you'll get there.
I love it. Couldn't have said it better myself. And I can only speak for myself, but I also feel confident in speaking for Nathan here. We're both honored and truly grateful that you chose to join the Remote Real Estate Academy, especially at the very beginning when we were launching that founding cohort. It's been absolutely amazing to watch you go through all these steps and all this discovery. We're sitting here recording this, leading into this big milestone. But like you said, there was a lot of work along the way. And I think being there for you on that journey is one of the more fulfilling things that we've been able to watch this year. So congratulations on the milestone and also all the personal things that you had to celebrate this year in your life. Really happy for you and can't wait to support you with whatever comes next.
Well, thank you so much, Aaron. And I'm very grateful to you and Nathan as well. It's been a game changer.
I love it. Well, where can people find you if they want to stay in touch or learn more about you?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter, not as active, but I still do check it regularly and post. It's at @Ullrich as my handle. And you can find my website there to see what else I'm doing and LinkedIn profile through that link.
Awesome. We will drop that in the show notes. And if you enjoyed this interview, make sure to please leave a 5-star rating and review for the show. That is one of the only ways that it grows. So thanks again for coming on the show, Adam, and we'll do it again soon.
Thanks, Aaron. Looking forward to it.
Thank you for making it to the end of today's episode. As you may know, podcasts are very difficult to grow organically. If you're getting value from today's episode, I'd deeply appreciate if you can take 30 seconds to leave my show a 5-star rating and review. This will go a long way to helping me reach more listeners just like you. Thank you so much in advance.